Let's see how many attendees come on. So far, one. There they come. So far, we got 2 attendees. Now we get 4. For those that are coming online right now as attendees, you're muted, and when we get to a point in the meeting where you're allowed to talk, we will unmute you and allow you to talk. But until then, you can't talk. And I do believe the question and answers portion of the page is open if you have something you need to ask us. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Let everybody log on. And just give it about 1 more minute, and then we will start the meeting. Still see that we have 5 attendees. I'm going to give it until 5:33, and then we'll get started.
Yeah, because I think we had 16 signed up as of this.
Yeah, I saw 18. The
Okay.
last I saw.
Cool.
So hopefully people sign up here in a minute or sign on. Just about another 30 seconds, and then we'll get going. All right. Well, it's 5:32, 33 is just coming up. Hello, everybody, attendees that are out there. My name is Matt Lafferty. I'm the principal planner with the Long Range Planning section of the Community Development Department here at Larimer County. And tonight we're going to be talking about how we can update and modify our code if we need to, as it relates to issues related to urban agriculture and the keeping of livestock. We know this is an important issue to a lot of people out there, and our community is changing a lot when it comes to agriculture. And so we want to make sure that our code is accurate and represents what the community wants to see. So with me tonight is our Jen Cram. She's also a planner on our staff here at the Community Development Department. She's planner 2 and helping out with the code adoption process. And we have Austin Flanagan, and Austin is from our consulting firm that we've hired to help us with the code updates, and he'll be doing a presentation in just a few minutes. Also present in the background, quietly listening, is Leslie Ellis, and that's the Community Development Director for Larimer County Community Development Department. And so she's also listening in. And I see on the attendees list, we have 1. We did have 2, but we have 1 Ag Advisory Board member that's currently on, and I know several had signed up, so I would expect that as we move through to this proceedings tonight, that another attendee or 2 might show up from the Ag Board, and they're listening to represent your issues as well. So the way that tonight's going to operate, it's going to be pretty simple. Austin Flanagan will be giving us a brief presentation, probably about 10 minutes. And he'll be going over some of the history behind the where we're at with the code right now and some of the things that we might consider changing and how we can move forward. And then when he's done, what we will do is we'll allow participants to chime in and give us your opinions on what you think the future of this subject should be around urban ag and livestock, and give us your thoughts and inputs. So what we'll do right now, the list is I see there's 7 people logged on. If it stays somewhere around 7 to 10 or 12 people, we'll probably give you 3 to 5 minutes to state your issues and your comments. And then when that's done, we'll close out the meeting and we'll get to work on updating some regs for some future discussions. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Austin Flanagan. He's got a great presentation, and then we'll listen to everybody's comments in just a few minutes. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. So let me get this up really quick. Are you seeing the PowerPoint? Good. Excellent. Okay, like Matt said, we're going to go through some of the phase 2 agricultural considerations today. The first thing I want to say is that this is the first bite at the apple for agricultural issues as far as phase 2 is concerned. And tonight we'll be doing an overview of all of the main phase 2 agricultural issues we're looking at. But if you're interested in some of these particular issues that I'll be going through today, there are 3 main particular issues we'll go through today. We'll have an open house for each one of those issues. So you can see those dates on the screen, and after each one of those open houses, we'll take into account all of your public comments, and then we will put a draft out there in late July, including all of the draft agricultural regulations. So that is where we're going. And where are we at? Let's talk about the main 3 issues that are on the table for phase 2. It's the urban agricultural uses, farm stands, and livestock allowances. We'll talk about each in turn. Before we get there, I just wanted to give a brief reminder of some of the language in the comprehensive plan. I think we made some really good progress in phase 1 with the goals in the comprehensive plan, and I'll walk through a couple of those. But I just wanted to show you some of the language here just to say that we are walking in parallel with the goals of the comprehensive plan. We think we have a great framework from phase 1, and we're going to continue to build on it in phase 2. So that's a good segue into what we did in phase 1. So at a really high 10,000 foot level overview, we created new character areas. These character areas act as a way that we can tailor standards throughout the code. I'm showing you the conservation and agricultural character area on the right. That has 4 districts. 2 of those districts are new, the agricultural district and the agricultural commercial enterprise district. So again, looking back at that previous slide of the comprehensive plan, it said create an agricultural district and agricultural districts that support those types of activities. Well, we did that in phase 1, and we're going to continue to build on that model. Something else we did in phase 1 is introduce a whole lot of new agricultural uses. And I'm going to walk through some of those in just a minute. And in phase 2, that's really what we're zooming in on, is those agricultural uses. And we're looking at it through the lens of 3 questions. Are there missing agricultural uses? Should additional agricultural uses be allowed in more districts, i.e., can we make the use allowances more lenient? And are there additional standards that are needed, especially if we make those allowances more lenient? Should we add some use-specific standards that could take into account those perceived impacts? So let's start with what we did in phase 1 as far as the principal uses. These are the 2 use table, or an excerpt from the 2 use tables that, again, this was passed during phase 1 in late of last year. A couple of things I want to point out here. One, whole lot of new agricultural uses here, and generally a lot more lenient allowances. The one I want to just briefly touch on is that first use listed, agricultural operation. This use in many ways replaced the current definition of farm. It removed the exclusions for the current definition of farm, or I should say the former definition of farm, for minimum acreage and certain types of agricultural activity. So there are no exclusions in the agricultural operation use. It's a very broad agricultural activity use, and it's allowed by right in every single district in Larimer County. What that means is that we've made a way for agricultural operations, these broad agricultural activities, in every single area of the county. So I think just that is a big step forward. What we're going to be looking at in phase 2 are these principal uses. So I'll talk about each in turn, but I just wanted to show you how they show up in the use table right now, so it can give you a bit of a preview of what we might want to do about it moving forward. As far as accessory uses, here are your 2 tables. Same thing here, a lot of new uses and generally more lenient uses. The ones that we're going to be looking at today are backyard chickens and farm stands. And with that, we'll start diving in. Okay, so the first use on deck today, custom meat or poultry processing facility. We've heard a lot about this use during the phase 1 adoption period, and so we said we'd come back and take a look at it during phase 2. And while taking a look at it, we think that we could add additional standards here to minimize the impacts on surrounding neighbors. Now that can come in a lot of different flavors. One option is to require a certain distance or setback from the use and neighboring properties. Another option is that the use be required to be inside a building or structure if it takes place in a certain area in the county, like in an urban area of the county. Those are just options, but if we were able to put a standard like that forward, then I think we could look at also making this use a bit more lenient in places as well. So that's our first use. Our second, it's really second and third, backyard chickens, and then poultry and egg production. So similar thing here, we're going to look at the perceived impacts of these uses and see if a similar type of use-specific standard could help alleviate some of the perceived neighboring impacts. And when doing so, again, we can look at making the use allowances a bit more lenient. And then very quickly, we're looking at upping the allowances for backyard chickens. Right now, 6 backyard chickens is allowed. We're looking at moving that forward potentially to 8 backyard chickens being allowed, and doing so would align with the requirement in Fort Collins. Okay, farm stands. So recently, Colorado passed some state legislation, and to be able to come in alignment with that legislation, we are going to be amending the way we look at farm stands in the LUC. We're going to be doing 2 main things. We're going to be allowing farm stands in every single district in the county and removing the current size requirement for farm stands. So that's the first thing we're going to be doing. The second thing we're going to be doing is looking at adding additional standards, use-specific standards for certain types of farm stands that potentially generate more traffic in busier areas, and seeing if we can have a standard that gets at promoting the safety of farm stand operations. So perhaps that could come in the flavor of requiring designated parking areas on the same side of the street as the farm stand. That's just an option. It's something that we can discuss tonight. The last big thing I want to talk about today before we jump into our discussion, and I'm happy to go back to any of these slides later as a part of our discussion if that's useful. The last thing is the livestock allowances. And the question here is, how many animals should be allowed on a particular parcel? Right now, the LUC does have some animal thresholds for chickens, horses, and feedlots, meaning they have certain species limits for those types of agricultural activities. But generally, the county doesn't want to go beyond this. And so what we're proposing is to carry forward that current approach of only having the species limits for those types of animals and operations. But separately, in an administrative manual, add a policy recommendation that gives a suggested amount of livestock for a parcel based on an animal unit system. So an animal unit system could look like recommending 5 animal units per acre, where 50 chickens equals 1 animal unit and 1 cattle equals 1 animal unit. That's just an example. I want to highlight here again, this is something that would live outside of the code. It wouldn't be regulatory, it would be a recommendation. And we think it would be useful in guiding landowners as well as the county and helping them determine what the appropriate livestock allowances should be for a given parcel, based loosely at least on the perceived carrying capacity of land. And again, it would just be a recommendation. It would live outside the land use code, but we think it would be a really helpful tool moving forward. Okay, those are all the big issues. I know I breezed past those, but I want to give us plenty of time to talk about them. And like I said, I'm happy to go back. But again, if you are really interested in one of these topics and want to do a really deep dive on them, there's an opportunity to do so. So we have an open house scheduled for each one of these main topics. The dates are listed here. And again, the public draft will be available in late July for these issues. With that, I think we're about ready for discussion. Matt, did I miss anything? Jen, did I miss anything? Good to
I
go.
don't believe so. I think that was a great presentation, Austin. Appreciate it.
Great. I think I'll stop sharing unless folks want me to go back to a slide just so we can see our faces.
So just a couple of quick notes before we delve into taking your comments. First, there's enough people on here, or as few enough people on here that I guess we'll give y'all somewhere around 4 minutes to talk. If you get going past 4 minutes too much, I might remind you that your time is getting run out. But what we really want to hear from you is are the issues that we have on the table tonight, those types of issues that you want to continue to talk about? Are we capturing the things that aren't already in the code? And how can we improve those things from your perspective? So if there's something that we're missing out on, let us know. We'll consider how to incorporate that into the future discussions. What we want to hear tonight is, are we on the right track? What are your feelings about some of these things, and the like? We will repost this video. I'm recording this, so we'll post this video on the website. So if you want to share it with some of your friends, feel free to share it. Have them come back online. They can share comments with us via the website or those types of things, and share that information with us. And Rosemary, Austin is answering your question right now. The land use code is online. It's you have to go to larimer.org and then follow. It'd probably be easier if you just email me. It's on larimer.org under the planning webpage. And then you'll have to search for the land use code, and then you'll get in there and there'll be some tables there. It's fairly thick document. So if you contact me at my email, mlafferty@larimer.org, I'll just send you a direct link, and then you'll be able to just log on and link into that. So feel free to email me and ask those questions. So that's kind of where we are now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have you raise your hand on the lower bottom of the screen. You can raise your hand if you want to speak, and I will unmute individuals and ask them to speak, and you'll have 4 minutes to 4.5, 5 minutes to talk and share your thoughts. So just move your cursor to the bottom of the screen and you'll see a symbol that says raise hand. If you want to talk, please raise your hand.
And Matt, it looks as though we do have one question in the Q&A with regard to how are dairy operations handled in the current code.
And I think hopefully that'll come up and we'll be able to answer.
As a discussion.
Yeah.
Got it.
We'll come back to that.
Okay.
Thanks. Okay, Kristen, thanks. You're now free to talk.
Okay, so a couple of things. I was happy to see that you were talking about aligning farm stands to recent changes in Colorado state law. We've had a similar thing with poultry operations and the allowances for poultry operations, are you guys looking at those state laws when you're discussing poultry quantities allowed on land?
Yeah, those things we are looking at, and we will continue to look at. So, and to understand those and how they impact properties based upon the scale of property and whatnot. Yes.
All right, so I may have misunderstood, but it sounded like what Austin had said is that the current livestock or the current animal allowances that are in the code right now are going to stand as they are, with this extra guidance that's not part of the land use code, but it is there to help, guide conversations about animal stocking rates. But the calculation of animal units would allow for more poultry than what the current land use code allows. So that guidance allows for more in that situation than what the current land use code. So is that helpful?
I should have.
I'm just, sorry.
We're really not set up to have conversations, really just to take your input. And then we'll try to come back and answer those things with our next open houses. So yeah, Maureen, we'll be looking at or Christine, we'll be looking at those things as we go through, and we can try to address those. So give your comments and we'll take a look at those things. Are you still there?
Oh yeah, I'm still here.
Okay.
I might actually draft some stuff in an email just to put my thoughts together more thoroughly.
And that would be great. Yeah, we would
Okay.
appreciate any written comments you have.
There's a couple of Senate bills that I think might be of assistance to help put some framework around poultry a little better.
Okay.
Thanks, Chris. We could also
Any
post
other
those to
comments?
the website so that other people can see them.
Any other comments? Kristen?
No, not at this time. I actually like the topics that you guys are moving forward with. I think there's going to be a lot of good discussion regarding farm stands. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around farm stands. So I think it would be really good to clarify that in the code. And I think there's just some, I guess, conflict between what federal and state law allows and what land use code allows for poultry. So it's another one I feel like we really should put some details behind.
Thank you for your comments. Okay, Maureen McDonough, you are now free to speak. Maureen, you'll have to unmute yourself.
Can you guys hear me or not?
Now we can.
Okay.
And welcome.
I'm getting a bad echo and I'm not sure why.
You're just getting some feedback somewhere. I'm sorry about that.
Okay, let me walk away from my computer. Maybe it's being too close to the computer.
We'll
Okay,
mute ourselves.
so a couple of things. I know that you're not wanting to have a conversation, right?
And now we can't hear you. You're too far away.
Okay, there seems to be a problem. Okay. Can you guys still hear me or not? Okay.
Yes, we can.
So I'm having major audio problems. I may have to drop and try to come back because I've called in, but it's not working on the phone connection. It's trying to go through the computer instead. Let me drop and come back in. Get back.
Now you're muted, Matt.
Okay, sorry about that. Brett Beardmore, you've got your time on the floor.
Thank you. So I'm more relatively new to land use code, but I live in an open zone area, and I noticed on the previous table that there is no right at all for poultry in an open zone. And well, I guess since you're not really taking questions, but I'm just kind of hoping that that can be loosened a little bit, because I do live in an open zone, but I am in a rural area. And I just also wanted to reiterate what Kristen was saying, and hoping that we can align Larimer County Land Use Code with state and federal guidelines. More specifically, small flock poultry producers, and the number of birds that are allowed to be harvested and sold direct to consumer per year. So yes, that's my biggest issue for sure.
All right, thank you. Maureen, I see that you're back. You're free to speak again. You'll have to unmute yourself. Are you there, Maureen?
Let's see if we can figure this out.
How's that? Is that better?
Okay, yeah, it's gonna be a little rough, but that's all right. I'm gonna make do with it. So I just had a couple of comments. First of all, thank you, Austin. It was really nice to see the comparative slides. I like that very much. So thank you for doing that. I think that there's actually a lot of things that have changed since I saw the last iteration. So that's actually kind of exciting, especially being a farmer in Larimer County. Just a couple of things to echo what the other public comment was so far, aligning with what our state is doing as far as agriculture, I think is going to be really important for us and very critical for us as a county to make sure that we are aligning with the state guidelines and the new Senate bills that are being passed. There was a recent one about being able to sell animals and stuff. Another thing that I'd like to make sure that you're thinking about as planners is that from a processing perspective, there are religious communities, specifically the Muslim community and the Christian Orthodox community, that have to have animals butchered in a very specific way that they cannot get done at any of the local processors. That's USDA or non-USDA, just state inspected. So I really want to make sure that you guys are thinking about that as you're going through the plan and the code, because we don't want to ostracize large groups of citizens in our county. And so I know that for me, for one, in the last couple of months, I've had Christian Orthodox folks contact me asking if they could come butcher on my farm. I've also had Muslim customers. Every single summer, there's a big Muslim feast. Muslims from different parts of the world butchered differently. So just please keep that in mind when you're talking about processing. I really want to make sure that we're not ostracizing anybody by saying no processing can happen on farms. Another thing is the farm stands. I'm glad to hear that that's going to be discussed. But one of the things that I'd like you to think about is that it's probably not realistic that people can't go into a structure to pick up food. And so I think that that's going to be something that I'd like to see you address and have a conversation with amongst yourselves. So if you can please put that in your notes to take a look at. The next one is the poultry. I'd like to make sure that there's discussion happening and that you're really looking closely at, and these have to do with the animal units per acre, that you're looking at what our neighboring communities are doing, because the face of agriculture really is changing. And this goes outside of poultry too. As land becomes more and more expensive, and all of us here live in Larimer, and we know that developers are buying up land at a very fervent pace. And so I want to make sure that we're thinking about those animal units and making sure that the small farmers aren't going to be limited because they're in a little area if they only have 5 acres or 10 acres. So please make sure that you're just looking at Boulder and Weld, our neighboring counties, to see what they have to say. And then the last thing is that I'd like to make sure that where you've rezoned things, I'm still trying to figure out the new codes and the new zones, but where things have been zoned differently than what they were previously, that everybody understands, and it's very clear if there's a grandfather clause that's going in that protects people that are on those types of properties, or if there is a sort of appeal process to be included in a new zone that might be more beneficial to those landowners. But strictly from an agriculture, this is, Mo talking with my agricultural myopic goggles on. So these are just some of the things that I'd like you to keep in mind. So that's all I have for now. Questions for me?
Thank you very much. Kevin Jablonski, you are now free to talk.
Yeah, hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, sir, we can.
Great. Yeah, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it. I have sort of interest. I'm not a land use code nerd by any stretch, and but I do have sort of interest on multiple fronts here. So in terms of the topics presented, of course, these are all worthwhile. I can't know what was not selected to be spoken about, so it's sort of hard to say these are the right things, but certainly I think these are all important conversations. I just have a few comments here. No real bones to pick, but in terms of the custom meat facility conversation, I get concerns when I see that the biggest pushback is on seemingly neighbor concerns and how that butts up against some of our right to farm considerations, and just wanting to have some balance in rural areas. And I wasn't quite clear if that was entirely urban we were speaking about, or really throughout the county in terms of considerations about, reducing noise, reducing smells. But we are a right to farm state still, as far as I understand it. So keeping that in mind, that a lot of our producers choose to be in rural areas because they don't expect or don't want that pushback from being in an urban area and, for example, slaughtering chickens otherwise within the law, right? In terms of farm stands, the new land use code is going to, it has already greatly helped local agricultural producers reach their direct markets better. I think I was just on a board meeting call where we were talking about how we're seeing an explosion of farm stands and how this can be really beneficial to local producers. The parking thing could negate all of that. I really want you to be careful about the parking. As I understand it, it's very, very restrictive in terms of the amount of vehicles that are allowed to come in and out per day relative to then needing to do some pretty substantial and costly improvements. If we go too far on requiring parking, I think it could really negate the gains that are being made by local producers in terms of access to markets. For the animal units per acre, I was just curious, and I know you're answering questions, but it seems like the assumption is that those animals are grazing, and certainly setting animal units per acre for grazing animals is important. I would say that the greatest cause of rangeland degradation as a range scientist in our county is horses that are overstocked. So I would like to see that guidance applied to horses. Of course, it can't be required perhaps, but at least making sure the horse folks are in the conversation, because again, the greatest degradation is occurring due to horses in our county. But there are a lot of folks that are between a full-on grazing operation and a feedlot, and I think they might get lost in the mix here if we're not careful. Who might have 10 cows on an acre. You're not running a feedlot at that point. You just have 10 cows on an acre that you may graze perhaps somewhere else on a neighbor's property for a good chunk of the year, but then are fed hay and other feeds perhaps on that acre. And I want to be sure it's just not a binary of either in how we code it and how we think about it, that you are either grazing at an appropriate rate or you're running a feedlot, because there is a middle ground there, and I think it's just important to keep that in mind. And that's all I had. Thanks for doing this, and I appreciate you guys being open to this feedback.
Excellent comments. Thank you very much. Matthew Hirta, you are now free to talk.
Right on. You guys hear me okay?
Yes, sir, I can.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And my questions or concerns are a little bit different. They're pertaining to agritourism and then accessory use permitted with the farms. And so it's been my experience that allowing this accessory use in agritourism is a great way for farms to improve their exposure and profitability and all these things. But with the processes that are in place now, as I understand it, it's the administrative special review or just a regular special review. And those processes are extremely tedious, extensive, and most importantly, just expensive. I've talked to farms who have spent tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars going through engineering surveys and soil surveys and structural issues and all these things, and having to build on-site restrooms, when really the farm was just trying to offer a small community-based class that, you know, is obviously going to be benefiting the community and promoting the agricultural kind of heritage that the city was built on. And so loosening up the restrictions, or maybe having different requirements as to what falls under a special review or administrative special review, just because as it stands now, it looks like even if a farm is trying to hold a small scale class, they have to jump through extremely costly hoops, and it doesn't seem to benefit the city or the farm or the community or anyone else to have it be so expensive in that way. And so just curious to see if that can be looked at and maybe updated. I don't know when the last time that was looked at or updated, because that is becoming more popular, especially now with the COVID times. People want to get outside. They want to have better access to healthy food and a safe environment, and farms are a beautiful place to do that. So it seems like a win-win-win for the city, the people, and the farms if we can kind of loosen those restrictions. And then, yeah, is also just maybe some more specific as to what falls under those categories. So it's like an educational class, does that fall into a administrative special review? Or if products are sold, is that a more serious review or not? Or, you know, duration, and so some things surrounding those topics, I guess.
Great comments. Thank you, Matt. I think with one of the future topics, what we'll do is we'll start the meeting off, maybe the next open house, giving an overview of what our processes are so that people have a really clear understanding about what the process is and what's entailed, because I think that it's not so cumbersome as we might believe, but we'll take a look at that and give you a presentation on that as well. Gregory Garaff, you are now allowed to speak.
Well, thank you very much, Matt and Jen, for hosting this, and Austin for your presentation. And I guess maybe I could just say I want to second Matt's, the previous speaker's comments. My perspective on this is that the various categories that are currently part of the land use code seem to be very cleanly and crisply focused on production agriculture or production natural resources. And they kind of make it an oil and water type relationship with anything more residential, recreational, educational. So I suppose my comment would be that in the spirit of Matt's discussion there, I don't even really like the term ag tourism. We're not really talking about tourists coming in from out of state to visit our farms to do things like these classes that Matt mentioned. What about calling it something like mixed agricultural and other use? Some sort of categorization seems begged for to ease the process of people being entrepreneurial in the rural parts of the county, inviting people from the urban core to come out and do experience, in some sense, the virtues of rural life, right? Whether it would be, I think we have it maybe best encapsulated in the equine and horse categories, where we do have equine facilities. Folks can come out and take a riding lesson. That's fairly well regulated and understood. But we could envision things like the classes. We could envision things like event centers, weddings, etc. We can envision restaurants, maybe even pop-up restaurants and food service opportunities. I think of the example of Harvest Farm, located in Wellington, that is basically a rehabilitation facility for men, but it's also it operates on a working farm. So these kinds of mixed uses, the sky is almost the limit in terms of the creativity that folks might bring to the agricultural community, to the agricultural economy, if we weren't so clearly demarcating and saying it's only about production and it's only for a single owner family. I'll rest my comments there, but I hope that's clear.
Great comments, Greg. Thanks for that. And I saw that, I heard that you listed ag tourism. We also have value-added agricultural in our code. So
Okay.
continue to look at value-added agriculture, and then to think also that some of the uses that you brought up, aren't not allowed in the county. They might require separate approvals and be connected to ag, but maybe be a little bit detached, like maybe an event facility or whatnot. But wineries, for instance, are very much an ag operation. They're attached to ag. And so make sure you look at the value-added ag part too, and then
Okay.
we'll deeper dive into the subjects that you and Matt brought up.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right. Don't usually allow it, but I'm going to allow it. Kristen, you get a second round. We usually try to cut it off at one, but I know yours was a little choppy, but feel free to.
I know it's how I know how much you guys love me. I guess my other question was a lot of what we're trying to accomplish here in the land use code is allowing activities to happen without having impact on your neighbors. And you had mentioned some perceived impacts. I'm wondering if there's a way you can document what some of those perceived impacts are when it comes to agriculture and neighbors.
Okay.
It helps us understand how to mitigate it if we know what the impacts are. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds fair.
I don't know the best way, if you know what those are, the best way to share those with us so we can think about that when we're trying to negotiate what's the right thing to do.
Sure, absolutely. That's a great idea, and we'll try to give you some of that information as we move forward with this project. All right, I see nobody else's hand up. I see most everybody's spoken. There might have been a person or two that hasn't. If you want to raise your hand, we'll take it. Go ahead.
We have the 2 questions that were written, and I do have answers prepared for those if we want to cover those.
Yeah, I think we have a little bit of time here if you want to answer those 2 questions.
Sure. The first question was, how are dairy operations handled in the current code? And so currently, commercial feedlots and dairies are allowed in the rural districts of FO forestry, A agriculture, agricultural commercial enterprise, rural residential 1 and rural residential 2, as well as O open with the approval of a special review. And you can look at Article 3.2.6, the chart, to see that. So I don't know if whomever wrote that question has any other comments or questions related to that we can help answer.
Those generally, what makes a dairy is simply dairies used to not be regulated in the county, but they were added in with this go round of amendments because they are pretty much the same as a feed yard when it comes to impacts. Yeah, the product and how things operate are a little bit different, but the impacts associated are somewhat similar. So whenever you're keeping more than a certain number of animals, it's usually 10 cattle per confined acre of land for the purposes of harvesting dairy or meat or those other types of things, then that's considered a dairy, and that goes through our special review process. And that's just to make sure that the impacts associated with that use are adequately mitigated so that we have a good compatibility addressed by our neighborhoods and people living around them. Jen, you want to answer the stocking
Sure.
rate answer on?
Yeah. And so then there was a question about the stocking rate for horses. And so currently horses are allowed at 1 per half acre for personal use. We weren't planning to change this, but we're open to comment on this, and that is covered under Article 3.4.4H in the current updated land use code.
Very good. And then in addition to that, once you go beyond a personal horse, there are agricultural or there are equestrian operations that are allowed at various levels, depending upon how many horses you plan on harboring or boarding, what kind of training lessons you might be giving, and various impacts that are associated with that. So equestrian operations are also defined in our land use code now fairly thoroughly. That was a subject that was addressed by our current county manager and others about 8 years ago, and it was fairly well vetted. So we had no ambition of reinventing that because of the amount of work that went into that process. It was about 2 years of direct work with the horse operators in the county. So we believe those regulations are pretty solid. So where do we go from here? I invite you to go out onto our website. If you just go to larimer.org/planning. And then from there, there's a couple of picture icons. Just follow the one that talks about the land use code and you'll get down into these subjects. There's multiple amendments that are going on at this time. Or get a hold of me or Jen and we can share information with you. I'm M. Lafferty at larimer.org. And Jen, you are?
J. Cram, CRAM at larimer.org.
So feel free to email us and we can get you information as you need. We're going to post this video online. We'll post as much other information as we can. We have a schedule that's online so that you can keep track of when the next meetings are going to be coming up and what the topic matter should be, as well as any of the timeframes that we go and meet with, let's say, the Planning Commission or the Ag Board or the Board of County Commissioners, so that you can listen in on those activities as well and stay informed. Hopefully, maybe we can get together live in person at one of these meetings. It'd be better than meeting virtually and having some open conversations there. So with that, I think we're going to close out tonight's meeting and just look for these things to be posted online, and we'll keep you up to date as best we can with the information as it comes available. Thank you again for your participation, and we will talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.